The Arizona desert stretched endlessly before Sarah McKenna, its red earth cracked and unforgiving under the scorching sun. Her worn boots stumbled over loose stones as she pressed forward, each step a battle against exhaustion that threatened to consume her. The tattered hem of her black morning dress caught on thorny mesquite bushes, leaving threads like breadcrumbs marking her desperate path. "Just keep moving," she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "Don't look back." But the memories followed her like shadows. 3 months had passed since William's death from fever, 3 months of false sympathy from neighbors who saw only opportunity in her tragedy. Her brother-in-law, Thomas McKenna, had wasted no time in his calculations. "A woman alone can't manage the ranch," he'd declared at the reading of the will. "My friend Edgar Caldwell is a good man. He'll provide for you." Sarah's stomach churned remembering Edgar's cold smile, the way his eyes had appraised her like livestock at market. When she'd refused the arrangement, Thomas had grown cruel. "You'll marry him within the month, or you'll leave with nothing but the clothes on your back." The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Sarah's legs trembled with each step. She'd left the town of Prescott before dawn with nothing but the small bag clutched in her hands, her wedding ring, William's letters, and the last of their savings. Enough, she'd hoped, to reach her sister in California. But hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her water had run out hours ago, and the dirt road seemed to stretch into infinity. Every sound made her heart race. Was that hoofbeats behind her? Had Thomas sent men to drag her back? "I won't go back," she said aloud, her voice stronger now, fueled by desperation. "I won't be sold like property." The words echoed across the empty landscape, swallowed by the vastness of the Arizona territory. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Night was coming, and with it, dangers she didn't want to contemplate. Her vision blurred as she crested a small hill. Below, the road curved around a stand of cottonwood trees near what looked like a dried creek bed. It wasn't much, but it would provide some shelter. Sarah forced her legs to carry her down the slope, each step more unsteady than the last. The cool shade of the trees felt like salvation. Sarah collapsed against the largest trunk, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. Her hands shook as she opened her bag, hoping against hope that she'd somehow missed a drop of water. But the canteen was bone dry. "What am I doing?" she whispered, tears finally coming. "I can't make it to California. I can't make it anywhere." The doubt crept in like poison. Maybe Thomas was right. Maybe a woman alone couldn't survive out here. Maybe she should have accepted Edgar's proposal, swallowed her pride, and lived the rest of her life as a transaction between men. But then she thought of William, of the love they'd shared, the dreams they'd built together. He'd married her for love, not convenience. He'd treated her as an equal partner, not property to be managed. She couldn't dishonor that memory by surrendering now. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned back against the cottonwood's rough bark. The desert evening was surprisingly cool, and exhaustion pulled at her consciousness like a heavy blanket. Just a few minutes of rest, she told herself. Then she'd keep walking, but her body had other plans. Days of stress, poor sleep, and the punishing desert heat had taken their toll. As darkness settled over the Arizona wilderness, Sarah McKenna slipped into unconsciousness. Her small bag clutched to her chest like armor against an uncertain world. The last thing she heard was the distant rumble of thunder, promising a storm that might bring rain or might wash away her last chance at freedom. Dawn broke gray and heavy over the desert, thick clouds hanging low like a wool blanket. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the air humid and charged with electricity. Mist rose from the still damp earth, creating ghostly shapes among the cottonwood trees. Sarah stirred against the tree trunk, her body stiff and aching. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality crashed back, the flight from Prescott, the endless walk, the growing certainty that she wouldn't survive another day in the wilderness. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Dehydration had settled deep into her bones, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. The small bag had fallen from her grasp during the night, its contents scattered on the damp ground. Sarah crawled forward on hands and knees, desperately gathering William's letters, her wedding ring catching what little light filtered through the mist. "Help," she whispered, though she knew no one could hear. "Please, someone help me." That's when she heard it, the soft sound of hooves on wet earth. moving with purpose through the mist. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Had Thomas found her? Were these Edgar's men come to drag her back to a life of servitude? She tried to hide behind the cottonwood, but her weakened state made stealth impossible. The hoofbeats stopped somewhere beyond the veil of morning fog. Sarah held her breath, pressing herself against the tree bark. Then the mist parted, and her world changed forever. The horse emerged first, a magnificent paint stallion, its coat a pattern of white and deep brown that seemed to blend with the desert itself. Its rider sat perfectly still, studying her with dark eyes that held no threat, only careful assessment that he was Apache. She realized with a start that was part fear, part fascination. His long black hair was held back with a leather band, and he wore traditional clothing mixed with practical elements: buckskin pants, a cotton shirt, leather vest adorned with turquoise and silver. But it was his face that captured her attention. Strong, weathered by sun and wind, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the morning mist. Sarah knew she should be terrified. Everything she'd been taught about Apache warriors, everything the townspeople whispered in fearful voices, told her to run. But she couldn't move, and not just because of her physical weakness. There was something in his posture, in the way he held himself, that spoke of dignity rather than menace. His hands rested easily on his horse's neck, making no move toward the weapons she could see: a rifle in a leather scabbard, a knife at his belt. He was clearly capable of violence, but violence wasn't his intention here. "You are far from the town," he said finally, his English accented but clear. His voice was deep, measured, like someone who chose his words carefully. Sarah tried to respond, but only managed a cracked whisper. Her throat was too dry for speech. The Apache warrior noticed her distress immediately. Without dismounting, he reached for a water pouch secured to his saddle and tossed it to her with an easy, practiced motion. The leather container landed softly near her feet. Sarah stared at it for a moment, hardly believing what was happening. Then desperate thirst overcame everything else. She grabbed the pouch and drank deeply, the cool water like liquid salvation flowing down her parched throat. Slowly, the warrior advised, "Too much at once will make you sick." Sarah forced herself to pause, gasping as she lowered the water pouch. "Thank you," she managed, her voice still rough but functional. I thought I was going to die." "You nearly did." He studied her torn dress, her obvious exhaustion. "You are running from something." It wasn't a question. Sarah met his gaze, seeing understanding there that surprised her. "Yes," she said simply. He nodded, as if this confirmed something he already knew. "My name is Nailnish. In your language, it means he works." He paused, then added, "Most whites call me Nathan." "Sarah?" she replied, struggling to sit up straighter. "Sarah McKenna." "You are alone, Sarah McKenna. This is dangerous country for a woman traveling without protection." "I know." The words came out stronger than she felt. But sometimes danger is better than the alternative. Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even respect. He understood about choosing danger over surrender. Sarah could see it in his eyes, the same knowledge that some fates were worse than death. "The town men, they will come looking," he said. "Probably." Sarah's hands tightened on the water pouch. "My brother-in-law wants to marry me off to his friend. For business reasons." When I refused, she trailed off, not wanting to sound like she was asking for pity. That Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And so you chose the desert." "I chose freedom." The words surprised her with their conviction. "Even if it kills me, at least it will be my choice." For a long moment, Nathan said nothing. Then he dismounted with fluid grace, his movements economical and sure. He approached slowly, hands visible, until he crouched a few feet away from where she sat her day. "I know about choices," he said quietly. "About running from those who would control your life." His dark eyes met hers. "About the price of freedom." Sarah saw something in his face then, a shadow of old pain, carefully controlled but not entirely hidden. This man knew about being hunted, about having to fight for the right to live on his own terms. "I can't go back," she said, and meant it. "Then, you must go forward." Nathan stood, extending his hand to her. "But not alone. Not like this." Sarah stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that accepting it would change everything. She was a white woman, he was Apache. The world they lived in had no place for whatever understanding was growing between them. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the same determination that had driven her into the desert, the refusal to let others define their fate. She took his hand. Nathan's hand was warm and calloused, speaking of years spent working with horses and weapons and the hard business of survival. He pulled Sarah to her feet with gentle strength, steadying her when she swayed. Up close, she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the small scars that marked a life lived on the edge of civilization. "Can you ride?" he asked, studying her carefully. Sarah had ridden as a child on her father's farm, but that felt like a lifetime ago. "I think so," she said, "but I don't have a horse or money to buy one." Nathan's mouth curved in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I did not ask about horses or money. I asked if you could ride." Before Sarah could respond, he whistled, a low, complex sound that seemed to blend with the wind. From beyond the cottonwoods came an answering whinny, and moments later, a second horse appeared through the morning mist. This one was smaller than Nathan's paint stallion, a bay mare with intelligent eyes and a sure-footed gait. "This is Ayana," Nathan said, approaching the mare with obvious affection. "Her name means eternal blossom. She was my wife's horse." The way he said was told Sarah everything she needed to know. Loss recognized loss across all boundaries of culture and circumstance. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Nathan nodded once, acknowledgement without elaboration. "Ayana needs to be ridden. She grows restless with only my stallion for company." He ran his hand along the mare's neck. "She is gentle but strong. She will carry you safely." "I can't take your wife's horse," Sarah protested. "It wouldn't be right." "What is not right is letting fear of the past prevent us from surviving the present." Nathan's voice was firm but not unkind. Ayana was bred for long journeys across difficult terrain. She has been waiting for someone who needs her strength. Sarah approached the bay mare slowly, extending her hand for the horse to sniff. Ayana nickered softly and nuzzled her palm, and Sarah felt something ease in her chest. "Hello, beautiful girl," she whispered as Nathan helped her mount. Sarah's torn skirts made the process awkward. She had to hike the fabric up considerably to sit astride, a position that would have scandalized the ladies of Prescott. But propriety seemed insignificant compared to survival. "Where are we going?" she asked as Nathan swung onto his own horse. "Away from the roads they will search," he replied. "There are places in the high country where we can rest, plan your next move." Sarah studied his profile. "Why are you helping me? You don't know anything about me." Nathan was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard experience. 2 years ago, soldiers came to our village. They said we must move to the reservation, leave the land where our people had lived for generations. When we refused, they brought more soldiers." He paused, his hands steady on the reins. "My wife, Itzel, tried to protect the children during the fighting. She was shot trying to reach a baby whose mother had fallen." Sarah's breath caught. "Nathan, I carried her to safety, but she died 3 days later." His voice remained level, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. "The soldiers said we were criminals for defending our home. They hunted us like animals. I learned what it means to run, to have your life decided by others who see you as less than human." The parallel wasn't lost on Sarah. Different circumstances, same fundamental injustice. People with power deciding the fate of those without it. "So when I see a woman fleeing forced marriage," Nathan continued, "I see someone fighting for the same thing I fought for, the right to choose your own path." They rode in thoughtful silence as the morning mist began to clear. Nathan led them away from the main road, following deer trails and rock formations that would leave little trace of their passage. Sarah marveled at his knowledge of the terrain, the way he seemed to read the landscape like a familiar book. "You know this country well," she observed. "It is my country," he said simply. "My grandfather taught me these paths, and his grandfather taught him." The white man's maps show empty spaces, but every hill, every stream has a story. As they climbed into the foothills, the desert gave way to scattered pine trees and rocky outcroppings. The air was cooler here, and Sarah felt her strength beginning to return with the water Nathan had given her and the relief of no longer walking alone through hostile territory. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they paused to rest the horses. Nathan nodded. Why haven't you gone to the reservation? It might be safer than living out here. His expression hardened. Safety bought with surrender is not safety at all. It is slow death of the spirit. He met her eyes. You understand this, or you would not be in the desert fleeing marriage to a man you do not want. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from recognition. He was right. She did understand. My husband William used to say that some prisons have comfortable cells. Your husband was wise. He was. Sarah adjusted her grip on Ayana's reins. He would have liked you, I think. He believed in judging people by their actions, not their appearance or what others said about them. Nathan studied her for a moment. It is rare to meet a white woman who speaks of her Apache guide as someone her husband would have liked. It's rare to meet an Apache warrior who saves white women from their own poor decisions, Sarah replied. Then immediately worried she'd been too familiar, but Nathan's stern expression softened into something that might have been amusement. Perhaps we are both rare, Sarah McKenna. As they resumed their journey into the mountains, Sarah found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday morning, she'd been a desperate widow with no options. Now she was riding through Apache territory with a man who understood her need for freedom better than anyone in her own community ever had. It shouldn't have felt right. Everything she'd been taught told her it was dangerous, improper, impossible. But as the desert spread out below them and the mountains rose ahead, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since William's death. Hope. The hidden canyon Nathan led them to was a revelation. Tucked between towering red rock walls, it held a natural spring surrounded by grass and wildflowers. Ancient petroglyphs decorated the stone surfaces, telling stories of peoples who had found sanctuary here long before Sarah McKenna or Nathan Nailnish were born. This place is sacred to my people, Nathan explained as they dismounted. A neutral ground where even enemies could rest without fear. Sarah looked around in wonder. It's beautiful, like something from a dream. They made camp as the sun reached its zenith, Nathan showing Sarah how to gather dry wood that would burn with minimal smoke. She watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the way he seemed perfectly adapted to this harsh but magnificent country. You must be hungry, he said, producing dried meat and corn cakes from his saddlebags. This will give you strength for the journey ahead. As they shared the simple meal beside the spring, Sarah found herself studying Nathan's face. In the harsh light of midday, she could see more clearly the marks left by grief and hardship. But there was something else too, a fundamental strength that hadn't been broken by loss. What will you do, he asked, when you reach your sister in California? Sarah had been dreading this question, even from herself. I don't know, she admitted. I have a little money, but not much. I can sew, cook, keep house. Maybe I can find work as a seamstress or housemaid. You were not born to be anyone's servant, Nathan said with quiet conviction. Neither were you. But here we are, both refugees from the lives other people planned for us. Nathan set down his food and looked directly at her. There is something I must tell you. Something that changes what is possible. Sarah's heart began to race. Had he reconsidered helping her? Was he going to abandon her here? I am not just fleeing the reservation, Nathan continued. I am traveling to Mexico to join others of my people who have found freedom there. It is dangerous. We must cross territory controlled by both American soldiers and Mexican authorities who see us as criminals. But there is a chance for a new life. Sarah absorbed this information slowly. You're asking me to come with you. I am telling you it is possible. Nathan's voice was steady, but you must understand what it means. We would be outlaws to both governments. You would be giving up any chance of returning to your old life, of reconciling with your brother-in-law, or living among your own people. My own people, Sarah repeated bitterly. You mean the ones who see me as property to be traded between men? Who think a woman's only value is in her ability to produce heirs and manage households? Yes, Nathan said simply. Those people. Sarah stood and walked to the edge of the spring, watching the clear water bubble up from deep underground. This hidden place felt more like home than anywhere she'd been since William's death. Here, with a man who understood the price of freedom, she felt more like herself than she had in months. What about your people? She asked, turning back to Nathan. Would they accept a white woman among them? Some would. Others. He shrugged. Every people have those who judge by appearance rather than character. But among the free Apache, What matters most is your willingness to contribute, to share the dangers and responsibilities of our life. And you think I'm capable of that? Nathan stood and joined her beside the spring. You chose the desert over surrender. You walked until you collapsed rather than submit to a marriage that would have destroyed your spirit. Yes, Sarah McKenna, I think you are capable of the life we offer. The afternoon sun slanted through the canyon, painting the rock walls in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah thought of her sister in California, of the comfortable but confined life that awaited her there. Then she thought of William, of the dreams they'd shared about building something meaningful together. If I come with you, she said slowly, what would I be to your people? What would we be to each other? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. That would depend on what we choose to become. Among my people, marriages are not arranged by others for property or convenience. They are chosen by the two people involved, based on respect, compatibility, shared purpose. Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm, the heat spreading across her skin. Like a sunrise she hadn't expected, but she didn't look away from his steady, unflinching gaze. There was something grounding in the way he looked at her, not possessive, not desperate, but steady, calm, and real. Is that what you're offering? She asked, her voice low but steady. Marriage. Nathan didn't flinch, nor did he rush to reassure her with empty promises. Instead, he spoke with the quiet gravity of a man who had learned to weigh his words carefully. I am offering partnership, he said deliberately. A life built together, not out of convenience or convention, but out of choice. A chance to face the world side by side, not as savior and saved, but as two people walking the same road. Whether that becomes marriage. He paused, then continued with gentle honesty. That is something we would discover together if we choose to try. There was no sweeping declaration, no dramatic vow, and that was what moved her most. The absence of pressure or presumption, the clear-eyed sincerity of his words, touched something deeper in Sarah than any poetry could have. This, she thought, was what she had once known with William, true partnership. Not perfection, not fairy tale, but the simple, powerful intimacy of being seen, respected, and chosen each day, again and again. I have to ask, she said quietly, searching his face. Are you absolutely certain this isn't just pity? A noble impulse you'll regret when the dust settles, when the real me, the grief, the fear, the sharp edges starts to show. Nathan's expression sobered, and he stepped closer, closing the distance with intention, not urgency. Look at me, Sarah McKenna, he said, his voice like stone-shaped. By fire. When she met his eyes, he held them with an intensity that made the air between them feel electric. I have lived 38 years. I have known joy and heartbreak. I have loved and lost, fought and bled. I have watched my homeland vanish beneath the boots of progress and watched my people scattered like leaves in the wind. I do not make impulsive decisions about anything, especially not about the kind of woman who would stand before me with eyes like yours, asking for truth. He exhaled slowly, his voice softening with vulnerability. Yesterday, I was a man alone. I carried my grief like a stone pressed to my chest, heavy, unmoving. But today, I remembered something I had almost forgotten. That life is not finished with those brave enough to reach for more. That second chances aren't just a dream, they're a choice. And I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, not from sorrow, but from the sheer weight of being seen, perhaps for the first time since William's death. Not as a widow to be pitied, not as a burden or a symbol, but as a woman still full of fire, still capable of forging something new. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was rebuilding what was lost. She felt like she was beginning something entirely different, something that belonged only to her. When do we leave for Mexico? She asked, her voice a whisper between a laugh and a breath of disbelief. Nathan's expression broke into a rare smile, warm and full, softening the hard lines of his face and revealing the man beneath the warrior. It made him look years younger. Tomorrow, he said, if you're ready. The road will be long, and it will not be safe, but it will be ours, and I will not let you walk it alone. As the sun dipped behind the jagged canyon walls, the desert was bathed in hues of gold, copper, and deep amber, like molten fire spilling across the earth. Shadows stretched long and soft across the red clay, and the sky above deepened into shades of violet and indigo, the first stars beginning to blink awake. Sarah McKenna stood at the edge of the overlook, her arms folded loosely across her chest, the evening wind threading through her hair. She let the silence of the moment settle around her like a blanket, warm, grounding, sacred. She had come to this desert broken, hollowed out by grief and chased by ghosts, by the echo of a life once lived and then abruptly lost. But now, as the last light of day faded over the horizon, she understood something she hadn't dared to believe until now. She was no longer running, not from sorrow, not from fear, not from memory. She was moving forward, not blindly, not desperately, but with intention, with clarity, with purpose. She was walking toward a life that would be her own, not inherited, not expected, not shaped by the needs or fears of others. A life where she could choose not just her path, but her companion. A life where her scars, both visible and buried, were not things to conceal in shame, but emblems of endurance, of strength, of stories survived, at a life where she could finally exhale and let herself be seen. Fully, honestly, unapologetically. A life where love, if it came, would not be demanded, bargained for, or taken as duty. It would grow in the open, like wildflowers after a desert rain, fragile at first, but persistent, nurtured not by fantasy, but by respect, by choice, by the shared courage of two people who knew what it meant to lose everything, and still chose to try again. She had not been rescued here, and no night had come to save her. No miracle had rewritten her past. She had been recognized, and in Nathan, quiet, steady, unflinching Nathan, she had not found a savior, but something far rarer, a man who looked at her and saw not just her wounds, but her will. A man who didn't want to carry her, but to walk beside her. A partner, a witness, a mirror that reflected back the truth she was only now ready to see, that she was enough, that she had always been enough. The mist that had once clouded her future, the heavy veil of confusion, of quiet sorrow, of nights spent staring at ceilings with unanswered questions, had finally begun to lift. It hadn't disappeared all at once, not in a blaze of clarity or some grand epiphany. No, it had receded slowly, like fog dissolving at sunrise, burned away by something gentler and more enduring. The patient warmth of a new beginning. That it was not a dramatic transformation, but a quiet unfolding, a slow returning of breath, a reawakening. The light around her now felt different, not blinding or harsh, but clearer, sharper, yes, but kinder. It was the kind of light that illuminated rather than judged, revealing not only the road ahead, but the resilience etched into her bones. It was warmer, too, carrying with it the promise that she didn't have to face the unknown in isolation. And above all, it was honest. No illusions, no pretending that grief was gone or that fear would never resurface. Only the truth, that she was still here, still standing, and still capable of choosing. What lay ahead was no fairy tale. It would be hard. It would ask more of her than she could yet understand. There would be days of exhaustion, of doubt, of confronting shadows that had followed her for years. The road would be long, winding, unpredictable. There would be setbacks. There would be silence. There might even be loss. But this time, the path was hers, hers to shape, hers to stumble through, hers to claim, and she would not be walking it alone. Beside her was a man who didn't need her to be anything other than what she was. He didn't come with grand promises or hollow reassurances. He came with presence, with steadiness, with an outstretched hand and a simple, powerful truth. You do not have to do this alone. He didn't say, "Follow me." He said, "Let's go together." And those 4 words, spoken not in command but in companionship, shattered something old inside her and built something new in its place. As the wind curled gently around her, it carried with it the scent of sage and warm dust, wrapping itself around her like an old memory rediscovered. It lifted strands of her hair with a tender, almost reverent touch, like a whisper from the earth itself, reminding her that she belonged to this place, this moment. The canyon around her had fallen into hush, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. She lifted her gaze slowly, drawn upward by a feeling she couldn't quite name. The sky had deepened into a soft indigo, streaked with the last embers of daylight. And there, emerging with quiet certainty, was the first star. A solitary point of light, pale and unwavering, piercing the twilight like a promise whispered across time. It held steady, unflickering, against the vast canvas above her, refusing to be swallowed by the coming night. And in that fragile, expansive stillness, Sarah felt something shift within her, something subtle, yet profound. A truth settled in her bones, one she hadn't dared to fully embrace until now. Not just that life would go on, but that she would go on. That she was allowed to step into the unknown, not with fear, but with the quiet power of someone who had survived, endured, and chosen to begin again. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving the past, she was beginning to live beyond it. This was freedom, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of choice, not the promise of certainty, but the courage to step forward anyway, not being saved, but being seen and choosing to rise. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the only kind of freedom that ever truly mattered.